Before we begin, I want you to think about something. How long would you wait for someone you love? A day? A week? A year? Now, what if they never told you to stop waiting? Keep that question in mind, because today's story is about a woman who waited and waited and waited. This is a true story, or at least based on true events. The names have been changed, but what happened, what is happening, is real. There's a street in a quiet suburban neighborhood. Let's call it Winding Hollow Drive. Nice houses, neat lawns, the kind of place where everyone knows everyone, at least superficially. But there's one house on that street that nobody talks about anymore. Not at neighborhood barbecues, not at community meetings, not even in whispered gossip over fences. The house itself looks perfect, almost too perfect. The lawn is always trimmed, the windows are spotless. There's a porch light that burns day and night, as if waiting for someone who works late shifts. The neighbors noticed it first about 3 years ago. They'd see her shadow pass by the window every evening at exactly 4:47 p.m., like clockwork. Then, at 4:59, they'd hear footsteps approaching the front door from inside the house. And at 5:01 p.m., they'd hear nothing. Just silence. This happened every single day, 7 days a week, no holidays, no exceptions. Her name was Elena Hartwell, and she was waiting. To understand why Elena was waiting, we need to go back 3 years, back to March 14th. Elena and her husband David had been married for 4 years. By all accounts, they were happy. David worked at a tech company downtown. Elena was a freelance graphic designer who worked from home. They had a comfortable life, a good life. That morning, March 14th, was unremarkable. David had a meeting downtown. Nothing unusual. He kissed Elena goodbye at the door like he did every morning. "I'll be home by 5, he told her. "You always are," she said, smiling. David was precise like that, reliable. In their entire relationship, he'd never once been late without calling. It was one of the things Elena loved about him. In a chaotic world, David was her constant. At 4:30 p.m., her phone buzzed, a text from David. "Meeting running over, but I'll still make it. Love you." She texted back a heart emoji. That was the last communication she ever received from her husband. At 4:47 p.m., David's car was stopped at a red light 6 blocks from their home. He was probably thinking about dinner, about Elena, about being home in 13 minutes. A delivery truck ran the red light at 60 miles per hour. They told Elena later that David died instantly, that he didn't suffer. People always say that, don't they? As if it makes it better. As if instantly erases the fact that someone you love was there, and then suddenly they weren't. The police came to her door at 6:15 p.m. Not at 5 p.m. when David was supposed to arrive. At 6:15 p.m. For 1 hour and 15 minutes, Elena had been waiting at the door, wondering where he was, getting slightly annoyed, then worried, then frightened.
And then the doorbell rang, and 2 officers stood there with expressions she'd never forget. And they said words like accident, and sorry for your loss, and is there anyone we can call? But all Elena could think was, he said he'd be home at 5.
The funeral happened. Elena went through the motions. She accepted condolences. She listened to people tell her about time and healing and how David would want her to be happy. But inside, something had fractured. Because David had promised, he'd said 5 p.m., and David never broke his promises. At first, it was just a feeling, a nagging sense that something was unfinished, that the story couldn't end like this, mid-sentence, with David on his way home and Elena waiting at the door. She started small. One day, about a week after the funeral, she found herself looking at the clock. 4:47 p.m. Without thinking, she stood up, smoothed her dress, walked toward the door.
At 5 p.m., she opened it. Empty porch. Empty street. She told herself it was closure, just checking, just making sure. But the next day, she did it again. And the next. And the next. Weeks became months. Months became years. Elena's life crystallized around 5 p.m. Every day, she'd prepare. At 4:47, she'd check her appearance in the hallway mirror. She wore the same navy blue dress, the one she'd worn that day. She bought 3 more identical ones online so she'd never run out. The house remained exactly as it was. David's coffee cup still sat on the counter where he'd left it that morning. His jacket hung by the door. His side of the bed stayed made, untouched. She set the table for dinner every night. 2 plates, 2 sets of silverware, 2 glasses. She'd cook David's favorite meals and set them out steaming and fresh at 6:30 p.m. sharp. Sometimes, if she squinted, if the light hit just right, she could almost see him sitting there. Her friends stopped calling after the first year. Her family tried, but Elena always had an excuse. She was fine, she was busy, she just needed time. But the truth was, she couldn't leave, not for long. Because what if today was the day? What if David finally came home and she wasn't there waiting? She couldn't risk it. 3 years, 2 months, and 16 days after David's death, Mrs. Hoffman, Elena's next-door neighbor, made a phone call. Mrs. Hoffman was 73 and had lived on Winding Hollow Drive for 40 years. She'd watched Elena and David move in as newlyweds. She'd watched Elena transform into a ghost. The call went to the Department of Social Services, a wellness check request. No, Elena wasn't in danger. No, there was no emergency, but something was very wrong, and Mrs. Hoffman didn't know what else to do. The case was assigned to Marcus Webb, a social worker in his late 20s. Marcus had seen a lot in 3 years on the job. Hoarding situations, severe depression, grief that had curdled into something darker. But when he pulled up to Elena's house on that ordinary Tuesday afternoon, something felt different. He looked at the house. It looked perfect, too perfect, like a photograph, like time had stopped. He checked his watch. 4:52 p.m. He rang the doorbell at 4:55 p.m. At exactly 5 p.m., Elena opened the door. For a split second, Marcus saw something flash across her face. Pure, radiant joy. The kind of joy that comes from 3 years of waiting finally being validated. Then she saw him, really saw him, and the joy shattered like glass. "Oh," she said, her voice carefully controlled. "You're not... I'm sorry, I thought you were someone else." Marcus introduced himself, explained about the wellness check. Could he come in? Just routine, 5 minutes. Elena's smile was brittle, but she stepped aside. Inside, the house was immaculate, almost sterile, but there were odd details. The table set for 2, fresh food still steaming, a jacket hung by the door that looked like it hadn't been touched in years, but had no dust on it. "You have a lovely home," Marcus said carefully. "Thank you. David and I take pride in it." Present tense. Marcus noticed but didn't comment. Not yet. They sat in the living room. Marcus asked gentle questions. How was she doing? Was she eating well? Did she have support? Elena's answers were practiced, perfect, like she'd rehearsed them. Then Marcus glanced at the table again. "You set 2 places for dinner." Elena's mask slipped, just for a moment. "David likes to eat at 6:30. He's very particular about timing." "When do you expect him home?" "He's at work. He'll be back soon." "Elena," Marcus said gently, "when was the last time you saw David?" The question hung in the air. Elena's hands began to tremble. She gripped them together in her lap, trying to stop it, but the trembling only got worse. "He said he'd be home by 5, she whispered. "He promised." "When was this?" "March 14th. 3 years ago." The words came out broken, small, like saying them made them more real. "He had a meeting downtown. He texted me at 4:30, said he loved me, said he'd be home by 5. Marcus waited. He'd learned that silence was often more powerful than any words. "There was an accident," Elena continued, her voice hollow. "A delivery truck. They said he died instantly. Like that matters. Like it changes anything." Tears began to fall, and she didn't seem to notice them. "But he promised. David never breaks his promises. Never. So I thought, maybe there was a mistake. Maybe the hospital got it wrong. Maybe he's in a coma somewhere and he'll wake up and come home. Maybe. She looked up at Marcus, and the expression on her face was devastating. "It's been 3 years. I know he's not coming. But I can't stop. Because if I stop waiting, then it's real. Then he's really gone. And I'm not ready. I don't think I'll ever be ready." "What are you afraid will happen if you stop?" Marcus asked quietly. Elena looked around the room, at the perfectly preserved museum of her marriage. "That I'll forget him. That I'll forget what his laugh sounded like. That I'll forget the way he'd hum while he made coffee, or how he'd leave little notes in my sketchbook when I wasn't looking. That I'll move on and it'll be like he never existed." She stood and walked to the table, touched the back of David's chair. "Do you know what the worst part is? It's not the big things, it's the small moments. I'll see something funny and turn to tell him about it. I'll hear a song he loved and reach for my phone to text him. And every single time, I have to remember all over again that he's gone.
How often does that happen? Elena laughed, a broken, painful sound. Every day, multiple times a day, for 3 years, I've been remembering that my husband is dead, over and over and over again. Marcus leaned forward. That's 3 years of choosing to keep him in your heart. That's not weakness, Elena. That's love. She looked at him, surprised. But love isn't supposed to be a prison, he continued. It's supposed to set you free. Elena's breath caught. David used to say that, love with open hands. He'd say it when I'd try to plan everything, control everything. He'd laugh and remind me to hold things loosely. What do you think he'd say about how you're living now? The question landed hard. Elena sank into a chair. For a long moment, she didn't speak. When she did, her voice was barely audible. He'd hate this. He'd hate that I've spent 3 years frozen. He'd hate that I've turned our home into a shrine. He'd hate that I'm wasting my life waiting for someone who's never coming back. She looked at Marcus with red-rimmed eyes. He'd be so disappointed in me. I don't think disappointed, Marcus said gently. I think he'd be sad for you. There's a difference. Marcus told her about his sister. About sitting in her room for 2 years, frozen in his own grief. About the day his mother asked him what his sister would think of how he was living. She would have kicked my ass, Marcus said with a sad smile. She would have told me to get out of her room and go live. And I realized honoring her memory didn't mean stopping my life. It meant living it fully, for both of us. Elena was quiet for a long time. Then she stood and walked to a drawer, pulled out a small wooden box. Inside were treasures, photos, ticket stubs from movies, a pressed flower from their wedding bouquet, and her wedding ring. I took this off once, she said, looking at the ring still on her finger, about 6 months after. I felt so guilty I threw up. I put it back on and haven't taken it off since. She twisted the ring slowly, gold worn smooth from years of wearing. But keeping it on didn't bring him back, did it? Slowly, with trembling hands, she removed the ring. She held it in her palm, staring at it like it might vanish. I think he'd forgive me, she whispered, and she placed it gently in the box. Elena walked to the dinner table, the table she'd set every single evening for 1,096 days. She began to clear David's place setting, the plate, the silverware, the glass, the carefully folded napkin. Each item felt heavy with meaning. Each one was a small goodbye. As she worked, she spoke to the empty chair. I love you. I'll always love you. You were the best thing that ever happened to me, and losing you broke something in me that I don't think will ever fully heal. Her voice cracked, but she continued. But I can't keep doing this. I can't keep waiting at this door. I can't keep setting your place at the table. I can't keep pretending you're just late coming home." She picked up the last item, David's favorite coffee mug, the one with a chip on the rim that he refused to throw away. "So, I'm going to try. I don't know how yet. I don't know what comes next, but I'm going to try to live again. Not because I've forgotten you, but because I think that's what you'd want." She set the mug in the box with her ring. "Goodbye, David. I'll see you differently now." Marcus left her with a card for a grief support group. Thursdays at 7 p.m. After he'd gone, Elena stood at her front door, the door she'd opened at exactly 5 p.m. every single day for 3 years. The clock read 5:42 p.m. Normally, she'd stand here for hours, waiting, hoping, frozen. But instead, she walked to the living room window. Her hand hesitated on the curtain. She'd kept these closed for 3 years. The sunlight hurt. The sight of the world moving on while hers had stopped was unbearable. But now, slowly, she pulled the curtain open. Sunlight flooded in, warm, real, almost painful in its brightness. Outside, she could see Mrs. Hoffman watering her garden, a couple walking their dog, kids riding bikes, life continuing. And for the first time in 3 years, Elena thought, maybe I could join them. Not today, maybe not tomorrow, but eventually. That was 6 months ago. I was able to follow up with Elena recently, and she agreed to let me share where she is now. It wasn't easy. Nothing about grief ever is. The first month, she still found herself walking to the door at 5 p.m. Old habits die hard. But she'd stop herself, take a breath, and choose to do something else instead. She joined the grief support group Marcus recommended, Thursdays at 7 p.m. The first session, she sat in the back and didn't say a word, but she came back the next week, and the week after that. 3 months in, she rearranged the living room, moved David's favorite chair to a different spot. It felt like heresy at first, but the house needed to breathe. She needed to breathe. She started taking walks in the evening, started accepting invitations from old friends, started working on design projects again, really working, not just going through the motions. She went on a date. It was terrible and awkward, and she cried in her car afterward, but she went. And a few weeks later, she went on another one. Baby steps. The house on Winding Hollow Drive looks different now. The curtains are open. There's a new wreath on the door. The porch light no longer burns 24/7. There's a small potted plant on the front porch now, a succulent. Elena bought it on impulse at the grocery store 3 weeks ago. It's still alive. She waters it every morning. Inside, on her fridge, there's a design sketch pinned with a magnet, a new client project, the kind of work she used to love before she stopped loving anything at all. Someone's home, and they're not just waiting anymore. Elena still thinks about David every day. She still tears up when she hears certain songs. She still has his photos, his coffee mug, their wedding rings in that wooden box. But now, those things are memories. Beautiful, painful, precious memories. When I asked Elena what she'd want people to take away from her story, she thought for a long moment.
I'd want them to know that grief doesn't mean you're broken, she said. It means you loved someone, and that love doesn't end just because they're gone. It just changes shape. She paused, looking out her window at the world she'd rejoined.
And I'd want them to know that it's okay to let go. Not of the person, never of the person, but of the waiting, of the frozen moment, of the idea that if you just hold on tight enough, you can keep time from moving forward. She smiled, a real smile, sad but genuine. Time moves forward whether we want it to or not. The question is, do we move with it, or do we get left behind? So, I'll ask you again. How long would you wait for someone you love? There's no right answer. Grief is personal. It's messy. It's different for everyone. But maybe, somewhere in Elena's story, there's a reminder that love doesn't mean waiting forever at a door that will never open. Maybe it means opening a window instead and letting the light back in. If you or someone you know is struggling with grief, please reach out. There are resources, support groups, people who understand. You don't have to wait alone. Thank you for listening to this story. If it resonated with you, please consider sharing it. And remember, it's okay to move forward. It's okay to live, even when it feels impossible. Especially when it feels impossible.